While you're sitting here watching this talk, a baby is being born. And her parents have enormous hopes and dreams for her. And if they're like most parents, they also are curious about a lot of things. They have a lot of things that they're wondering. Will she be a poet or a CEO? Will she be healthy and happy? Will she like music or sports? They're curious. They wonder these things. And if they're like most parents, they also have a lot of worries. Will they be able to make enough money to give her a good life? Will they be able to spend enough time with her? Will her mother be able to nurse her? And then if they're anything like me and they read the things that I read on a daily basis, they likely have some weightier questions too. How likely is she to end up incarcerated, to be the victim of a crime? Will she ever stare down the barrel of a gun? Will she get good nutrition? Will she be fit? How long will she live? How likely is she to graduate from high school, from college? Will those things put her in debt? Will she be able to take care of her own children if and when they come along? We're humans, we're curious. So we wonder about the future and we try to predict it. But if you're really curious about all of those seemingly unrelated questions I just asked, I can tell you one thing, that has an enormous impact on all of them. And that thing is public policy. And the problem is that policy is something about which our curiosity is often discouraged. By policy, I mean the rules and regulations that we and our elected officials put in place. And as citizens in a representative democracy, you have the right and the responsibility to help shape those policies. And they control everything from whether a 3-year-old gets free preschool, to how much a company can pollute, to how much workers get paid, to whether I get to take a bus or have to drive from my home to my job every day. Policy matters. It matters so much that I named an organization, Policy Matters, Policy Matters Ohio. And you can find us on the web at policymattersohio.org. And we create a more vibrant, equitable, sustainable, and inclusive Ohio by fighting for the things that I think would make the life of that baby born a few paragraphs ago a little bit better. If you agree with the policies we put forth, you can go to our website and support us. But you don't have to agree with the policy ideas I have. What you do have to agree with is the fact that policy has an enormous effect on our health, our wealth, and our well-being. It has an impact on how much exercise we get, how much stress we suffer from, how much art we see. It impacts how much time we get with our kids and how well cared for our aging parents are. Many of these things seem to be solely about individual choice, but the fact is that parental leave policy, overtime policy, transit investments, public art investments, these public decisions shape and mold our private lives every single day. And of course, they also have a tremendous impact on how clean our air and water is, how quickly our ice floes are melting, how chaotic our climate will be. Now, here's the dirty little secret about public policy. It is very, very hard to change with individual action. Now, I know I am violating the first rule of speeches and of life. Nobody wants to be told that they don't have the power to change things. Everybody wants to know how they can make an impact. People want to dump ice on their heads. They want to shave their heads. They want to run in races. They want to have an impact themselves. People like me drive up to speeches like this, well, I walked, but they drive up to speeches like this with bumper stickers on their car that say things like, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever had. Well, I hate to break it to you, and I hate to break it to Margaret Mead, who said that, but the fact is you often need a large group of people. Thoughtless people also have a lot of impact on our policy. You rarely get exactly what you want. And if you're someone like me, it is highly likely that there are moneyed interests on the other side of whatever it is that you're fighting for. So I'm sorry, it's not very inspirational. It's a little hard to fit on a t-shirt. However, here is the inspirational thing about public policy change. A teeny tiny change in public policy can make an enormous difference in all of our lives. I'll give you a couple of examples. Right now in Ohio, every taxpayer sends 70 cents each year to the state of Ohio, which is then redistributed to our communities to support mass transit, the buses and trains that Hannah showed on her slide. 70 cents. I think in the cafeteria upstairs you can get a bag of chips for that much money. If each of you devoted 2 bags of chips a year, or maybe 5 bags of chips a year, to the state taxes that you pay to support mass transit in our communities, maybe my RTA would come a little bit more quickly, and maybe I'd be a little more likely to ride it. Tiny change, huge impact. I'm going to give you a different example. We have been cutting taxes in the state of Ohio for the past decade, cutting income taxes, to the degree that a taxpayer in the top 1% in Ohio now pays $20,000 less each year in state income taxes compared to what they paid a decade ago. At the same time, we have been cutting need-based financial aid for higher education more than any other state in the Midwest and almost more than any other state in the country. If we restored just 2% of the tax increases that we've been giving away, we could restore our need-based financial aid to its historic highs in Ohio. 100,000 kids who get those tiny scholarships would get a little bit more in their financial aid package. Maybe they could quit their second job, which might mean that maybe they could actually finish their coursework and get that degree and get the career that they had been hoping for. Tiny change, huge result. In London, in the early 2000s, the city was so congested that it was unpleasant to be in, it was deeply polluted, and people could not get around efficiently. Nobody knew how to handle this. They finally decided to put in place a $15 congestion fee to get into the heart of the city at the peak times of day. They didn't know how that was going to work out, and a lot of people didn't think it was a very good idea. You want to know what happened? Congestion dropped by 30%. The times for those journeys dropped by 14%. Biking jumped by 20%. Pollution fell. They generated over $1 billion in income. They were able to buy hundreds of shiny new buses in London, and there are now 30,000 more rides on mass transit each day in the city of London as a result of that change. It's better for bikers, it's better for walkers, it's even better for drivers, and it's certainly better for the planet. Tiny change, huge impact. But we tend to focus on other things. We tend not to ask so much about policy. When we meet someone, we wonder about their culture. We wonder about their race. We wonder about what kind of family they came from. We might ask them what sports they play, what hobbies they have, what TV shows they watch. And those are all fine questions. They're all interesting. Maybe the TV is a little less interesting. But we rarely ask ourselves, how might that person's life have been different if they had grown up under a different set of public policies? What if she'd been able to go to preschool and be prepared for kindergarten when she arrived in it? What if he'd been able to get that scholarship and finish that degree? What if she'd never breathed in that carcinogen? Those are the questions that we're less likely to ask. And the reason I think we're less likely to ask those questions is that I think we're discouraged from asking those questions. We've all heard it's impolite to talk about politics or religion. And in America, I think we have a very strong tendency to want to think that all of the results that come about are about individual choices and individual behaviors. We also have a really strong bias for wanting to say the market works a certain way and you can't intervene in it. If you do, you'll just hurt the economy. Well, the fact is, I would argue that there is a reason that someone doesn't want you asking those questions. There are people who benefit from the way that we have structured things now, and there are people who do not want difficult questions asked. So here's an example of a difference in policy between the United States and another country that seems to be mostly about the free market. McDonald's is a notorious low-wage employer here, pays about $9 an hour. Busts unions if they ever try to set foot. And most of us might look at that and say, that's just what that job is worth. And that's the way the market works. And if you change it, McDonald's won't be able to survive here, and none of those workers will have jobs at all. Well, the fact is that McDonald's also exists in Denmark. And in Denmark, McDonald's pays an average of $20.70 an hour. The workers are in a union, and they get paid overtime if they work on evenings or weekends. What is a poverty wage job here is a middle-class job in Denmark. Why? Policy. I'll give you another example. By the year 2017, if you live in Maine and you want to buy power from a utility, that utility will have to produce 40% of that power from fully renewable sources, wind and solar, for example. That same year, unless they change the policy between now and then, your grandparents in Florida will be able to buy their power from a utility that can produce 100% of that power from non-renewable, highly polluting, mostly imported fossil fuels. Here in Ohio, we had a clean energy standard. I think Zach referenced it in introducing me because Policy Matters helped get that through, a very carefully crafted bipartisan compromise. Last year, your state legislature froze our clean energy standards in Ohio, making Ohio the first state ever to go backwards on clean energy. The point is, what affects the cleanliness of the energy we consume and the air we breathe? Policy. Last example. Crime is down all over the world, which is a great thing. But your likelihood of being incarcerated varies tremendously depending on the policies of the community in which you live. So in Sweden, 51 out of every 100,000 people are incarcerated. That's sad, right? It's unfortunate. Here in the United States, 14 times as many of our neighbors are incarcerated in prison. 716 people for every 100,000. That means there are 2.24 million Americans who are not contributing to the economy, who are not helping their kids with their homework each night, who are not building toward a better future for themselves, and who we are paying to keep behind bars. Why? Policy. Now, I've talked about some of the things that I'm frustrated about, and that's a common problem that I have. But the fact is, I think that there are many things that we get right in the United States in terms of policy. We put in place the world's first K-12 education system, and then with the GI Bill, we let every returning veteran from World War II go to college for free. As a result, we catapulted ourselves from being an entirely uneducated agrarian society to a highly educated industrial society, from a place where only 1 in 4 adults had even a high school degree in 1940, to today, where nearly 1 in 3 adults has a 4-year bachelor's degree. Still not high enough, maybe, I would argue, but an entirely different change, and we became the most educated country on the planet. Other end of the age spectrum, the elderly. In 1930, 80% of our grandparents were living in poverty in the United States. We put in place Social Security and Medicare, sparked by those two things and also by the growth in the economy that was fostered by those educational investments. We lowered the elderly poverty rate to below 10%, so that today, elderly Americans are the least likely age group to be poor. We took a country that was deeply divided along racial lines, violently, viciously divided, and we got rid of slavery and Jim Crow. We passed the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act, so that today, while we haven't gone far enough, starting right here in Shaker, you can find integrated families and classrooms and boardrooms and neighborhoods. Our own Cuyahoga River caught on fire in the 1970s in an international embarrassment. Did we tuck our heads under our wings and say there's nothing we can do about this? No. In response, we passed the Clean Water Act at the national level, and today in that very river, 40 species of fish are thriving. They're cold today, but they're thriving. So I would argue that for our biggest challenges and our biggest opportunities, to make our air cleaner, to make our disease rates lower, to make our kids better educated, policy is essential. But here's the thing. You'll rarely hear someone like me come and give a speech like this without urging you to get registered and urging you to vote. And I'm not going to violate that either. You ought to do those two things. And you'll rarely hear a speech from someone like me who doesn't say, you ought to write to your elected official about the things that concern you. And not only do I agree with that advice, but I could probably give you a long list of things you could add to that list. But I would be lying if I implied that you alone doing those two things could make a significant difference. The fact is that if you want to have an impact on public policy, you're going to have to get involved in a larger movement. However, here's the good news. You don't have to do it exactly the way that maybe your parents or grandparents did. You don't necessarily have to doodle your way through as many boring meetings as I do, even though I think that they add some value. So I'm going to give you an easy entry to collective action. And that is that on the last Friday of every month, in cities all over the planet, bicyclists assemble at the core of their city and get on their bikes, and they go out and they ride past bars and board-ups. They ride past working-class neighborhoods and housing projects. They ride past college campuses and art museums. Here in Cleveland, we meet up at Public Square on the last Friday of every month at 7:30 p.m. Never changes. I don't always go in the winter. Join us. It'll feel like a bike ride, but you'll actually be building the case for more bike lanes, for more careful driving, for more community. It seems like a bike ride, but it's actually collective action. Or if your parents don't want you riding through the central city in the dark in Cleveland, then do something different. Go to a Black Lives Matter rally. Join a union. Join the group that's trying to reduce testing in Shaker Heights. But do something to not let people stop you from asking the questions that you want to ask. Do not let people stop you from asking the hard questions. Feed your curiosity. Why was that person laid off? Why is that kid in poverty? Why is the planet warming? Or let's turn those questions on their head. Why is that child so happy? Why is that lake so clean? Why is that city so vibrant? The answer, if you're curious, almost certainly has something to do with the policies that we, as citizens and students and activists, have helped to put in place. Be part of that conversation, be part of that fight, be part of that ride. Thank you very much.